Despite having 6 pets in my house, my yarn/craft room can quickly become one of the least organized areas in my entire home. And because of that, I've been doing a ton of research into creative ways that I can organize my yarn in my entire craft room space. And so I thought it would be really fun to share some of the ideas that I've come across recently. No matter how big your yarn stash is or what budget you have, I promise you're gonna find some really good ideas on this list that you might want to try out for yourself. Hello, welcome back. My name is Annie. I'm a crochet pattern designer and I love all things crochet, knitting, yarn, all of it. So if that interests you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. With that being said, let's get right into it. So before we get into the yarn organization solutions, I want to start by talking about why a disorganized yarn stash can become a really big problem. Some of these might be pretty obvious to you. Like for starters, your yarn is way more likely to get tangled, and obviously that is a complete nightmare. If you've ever experienced tangled yarn, you know firsthand it is like the worst feeling when you need that yarn, but you have to untangle it and all you want to do is work on your project. Personally, I just don't have the patience. I simply do not have the patience to sit and untangle my yarn, especially if it is chenille yarn, because then it's getting everywhere and it's like a big fluffy mess all over your room. It's a total disaster. Having a disorganized yarn stash can also lead to your yarn becoming dirty. Like for example, if you're working with natural fibers like cotton or wool, they might be more likely to get damaged if they're sitting in a box and they're not organized. So both of those reasons alone serve as great motivation to keep your yarn organized, because not only do they lead to yarn waste, but they also lead you to waste your money because you have to cut the tangles out. You have to throw out the dirty or bad yarn if it's getting tangled or fraying, especially the wool fiber like I mentioned. It can just be a total disaster. But also on a more practical level, it can just become so annoying when you want to work on a project and you know you need a specific type and color of yarn and you know you have it, but you cannot find it anywhere. There's nothing worse than having to go digging through your stash not knowing where it is. Oh my gosh. And I also just want to quickly address the fact that it doesn't matter how much yarn you have or how little yarn you have, you will benefit from having organized yarn. I know what you see behind me might look excessive, but I also want to remind you that this is what I do for a living. I crochet all the time. And so obviously this is more likely to become very disorganized, but if you have less yarn than me, you can still benefit from these tips. So now that we have all of that out of the way, I want to get into some storage solutions that you can use in your space, whether you have a whole designated craft room or you are just working out of your bedroom. Whatever the space is, you will find something on this list that will inspire you, I promise. So let's start by talking about some budget-friendly options. One of my absolute favorite ways to store my yarn is with a pegboard. And I used to have a giant pegboard in my old craft room. If you've been around the channel, you might remember this, but it was just a giant white wood pegboard that I got from Home Depot. Believe it or not, it only cost me about $10 for that entire thing. It was a cheaper wood material, but you couldn't really tell from looking at it. And then I also had little hooks all over it, and I spent maybe like $15 on that. And for the size of it, I would say it was a great deal. It stored a ton of yarn, and it also served as kind of a pretty decorative way for me to keep my yarn displayed. I didn't really have the budget to be filling my craft room with a bunch of art and decor and stuff, and so I feel like it was a really great way to fill up that space without breaking the bank. But obviously at the same time, I was able to store so much yarn on this thing, and one common theme you're going to see throughout this video is that I personally like having my yarn on display, because if I don't see it, I tend to forget that I have it. I tend to not think about using it ever. And so when I see my yarn sitting up on a shelf or something, I know what colors I have, how much I have of each, and I also feel inspired to work on certain projects. Like one example for me is my little hand-dyed yarn wall. I just looked at that yarn today and I bought a pattern to make a sweater, and I probably wouldn't have done that if I wasn't staring at the yarn, honestly. So needless to say, I really love the idea of a pegboard, and there are so many different ways that you can go about it. Like for example, in my new craft room that I'm in right now, I wanted to do a smaller pegboard, and I actually found one at Michael's that was a really nice size and comes in a small square shape. But if you wanted to, you could always extend these out to make a larger pegboard. These ones are a little bit more expensive because they have a nice white metal finish to them, but they do come with all sorts of different accessories that you can find in Michael's as well. So things like little acrylic pen holders that you can put on there, and really nice hooks hooks and things for your yarn. Right now, I only have one of them, but I love it so much that I might actually add another one later on. I feel like the one pegboard is a good enough size though for how much hand-dyed yarn that I have. I didn't quite need such a large one before. So that could be a really great idea, especially if you're low on space. I think utilizing your walls is such a great way to keep yarn organized. And I also just think yarn is fun to decorate with. Like, I think it just looks really cool up on a wall. And of course, it's going to be cheaper than having an actual piece of art up there. But a lot of yarn is so pretty that it honestly works just as well as art. I think it's such a cozy way to fill up a space. Anyway, let's move on to the next one, which is a little trolley. This is something I've been meaning to get for the longest time, but I was just reminded of this when I was looking through Pinterest. And so they sell these at Michael's as well, and I'm sure a lot of other craft stores, but they're just little metal trolleys that usually have 3 shelves on them. I think these are so great if you're somebody that likes to knit or crochet in all different rooms of your house. For me personally, I love to knit and crochet in my craft room, but I also love working on my projects out in the living room and watching TV at night with my husband. And so I know I would personally benefit from something like this because you should see me in the evenings. I'm carrying a bag of polyfill, got like 5 skeins of yarn and all my little notions. It can become super annoying carrying things back and forth. And so I think having a little cart like this would solve a lot of those problems for me. But this was also the very first yarn storage that I ever had when I started crocheting. So I had a very small stash at the time, and this was perfect for me to wheel between my bedroom and my living room. I kept all my most used yarn on the top shelf. I would keep whips on the second shelf, and then all of my different notions and polyfill and things like that on the bottom one. So that can be really great if you're operating out of a smaller space like a dorm room, a bedroom, or honestly really anywhere. I know I'm planning on getting one, and like I mentioned, I know they have these at Michael's for somewhere around $30, but Michael's always has tons of coupons, so you can definitely get a deal on something like this. Another idea that I really love is using shelves and little glass containers to organize your yarn, especially if you're working with smaller yarns like little skeins of lily, sugar and cream, cotton, or things in that kind of size range. I think can be really fun to display in a pretty glass jar on your shelf. And this is also great if you have a lot of scraps from finishing your projects. You can keep all your scraps in these glass containers to use for stuffing amigurumi projects later on. I think that's a really great way to prevent yarn waste while also kind of creating like some decor elements in your room. If you like the idea of displaying your yarn on the wall, but you're looking for something even cheaper than a pegboard, I have seen people do wooden dowels with little hooks on the ends of them, and I think that's a really fun way to store and display your yarn if you're on a budget. You can use practically any yarn on this, and I think it would be even prettier if you color coded it. You might be able to tell from behind me, I'm a huge fan of color coding. Another really inexpensive option is using those shoe organizers that you can hang on the back of your door or in your closets. I think that is absolutely genius for storing your yarn. And again, if you don't have a ton of space either, this is a really great way to store a lot of yarn while keeping it out of the way. This is another one I plan on getting as well because it just makes so much sense. I love how practical this is. Another thing I had to mention is that if you are one of those lucky people that has those ottomans with storage or one of those IKEA style couches that has the pull-up part where the sectional is and you can store stuff in there, that is an amazing place to store yarn as well, especially if you like working on your projects in your living room. I feel like that is such a great idea. I've actually thought about getting a little ottoman for this chair behind me right here that has some sort of storage inside of it because I'm always looking for new ways to hide my yarn, and I just love that idea so much. And of course, we have the classic IKEA Billy bookshelves. You'll see them behind me, and I'll show you a better look at them in a second, but these are popular for a reason. I'll just say that. I think they look so nice, and it can be so pretty to just have a bunch of yarn sitting on your shelves. It creates a really nice background for a lot of my product photos as well, so it kind of is like a 2-in-1. I really love using bookshelves for yarn storage. So another thing that I've seen recently that I hadn't previously thought of is using those sort of like end tables that are meant for storage. So the top of them comes off and the bottom is sort of like a basket. Using one of those for yarn storage I think would be so genius, and also such a cute way to keep things organized in whatever space that you are in. while also still having like a multifunctional piece of furniture, because obviously you can use this as an end table or a nightstand, and it really is just perfect. So perfect in my mind. If you have a chair in your house you like to crochet in, this is like the perfect thing to keep next to it, so you can keep your tea or your coffee there and all of your yarn inside of it. I love that idea so much, and I definitely want to get one of these. I've mainly seen them with like a metal bottom, but I would be interested to see if I can find one that's more of like a basket material on the bottom. So we've talked about some storage solutions for yarn, but I want to get more into the nitty-gritty of organizing the yarn itself, because in my mind this is really where things matter. I'm talking about organizing things by color, by weight, by fiber. This is what's really going to help you out when you are looking for yarn for a specific project and you don't want to go digging through bins and not be able to find things. I'm speaking from experience here. It is not fun. I feel like this is one area of my yarn organization that I have done right so far, so I'm going to turn you around and show you what this bookshelf looks like behind me. So I'm definitely not an expert in yarn storage, but this is what I have going on so far. So this is the IKEA Billy bookshelf, just the classic one here on the left. And then I also have the corner unit one that I just got recently, and I love this thing. I think it's so cute how it just rounds out the corner. But you'll notice here, this is one of the systems I have in place that works for me, and it is just organizing everything by brand and color. So right here, I have all my Parfait Chunky and the equivalent brands like Hobie Honey Bunny, Hobie Toucan, things like that. And I tried to organize it like the colors of the rainbow. So I have red, orange, yellow, green. I love my green, so I have 2 shelves of green. And then we have blue, purple, pink. We go into the whites, grays, and then blacks and browns right here. And then when you go onto these lower shelves, I have some of my acrylic yarns in this one here. These are a few of the Joanne Big Twist Posh Baby Bear type of situation in this one. A few more random acrylic yarns that I don't tend to use very often. Down here, I have more of my jumbo chenille yarns. So yarns like Sweet Snuggles and things like that. And then kind of moving over here, I keep all my fur yarns. This could definitely stand to be organized right here. It is by no means perfect. But then if you move up here, I have my hand-dyed yarns. And these stay really nice and organized until you get them out of their hanks. But when they're just in the hanks like this, I find that they just stay really nice and organized by just putting them like that. And coming over here, I have my Sweet Snuggles Light from Michaels. Down here is some velvet. This is my Bernat blanket. Up here we have the Petite Pearl and Skinny Chenille from Michaels, and then one of my new favorites is the really good chenille yarn from Zaddy Crafts, and then that's just a bunch of whips in there that inevitably will sit there forever. So this is my main yarn storage. This is a yarn that I use on a daily basis, and so for me it's really nice to have everything color coded, because I know when I'm going to work on a project I can look into a specific area and see what different shades of a color that I have for that project. And like I mentioned, you definitely don't need to have this much yarn. I can admit it's pretty excessive, but this is also my job and what I do full time, so it's kind of bound to happen where I accumulate things because I'm using it so much. But that being said, I still think everyone can benefit from having their yarn organized by color, weight, fiber, and so on. So regardless of what storage solution you are using to organize your yarn, I think everyone can benefit from organizing their yarn by brand, color, fiber, so on and so forth, because it just makes things easier. It gives you a better idea when you are looking at things. You don't have to go hunting for all different types. You just know your Parfait Chunky is right there. Your Karen Cotton Cakes are over there. You get the idea. Because I think a lot of times when we don't organize our yarn this way, it can be really easy to forget that we have something. Like for example, this happens to me all the time with my acrylic yarn because I don't tend to use it as much. So I actually have a bin of it in my closet back here. And since I don't have it out with the rest of my acrylic yarn, I tend to forget that it's there. And then sometimes I end up buying yarn that I didn't actually need because I didn't realize that I had it. If you know, you know. It can be a real struggle, but that is one of the reasons why I think it is so important to organize your yarn this way. So that's something else that I plan on doing, is getting all of my acrylic yarn in the same space so that I can look at it all together, because that's ultimately what gives me the most inspiration when I'm wanting to start a project, but also helps me eliminate potential yarn waste by buying something that I didn't need. I also think it's important to talk about some tips to keep your yarn in good condition once you do get it organized. And starting with one of my favorites, it is winding your yarn. Obviously, this isn't really something that I do with my chenille chenille yarn since it tends to come in smaller rolls and I just use it up so fast that it's not as necessary. But for things like hand-dyed yarn or different wool yarns or really large skeins of yarn, I love to wind them up, and my favorite way to do that is with my electric yarn winder. I was gifted this yarn winder from Kato a few months ago and I just absolutely love it because I can just let it run and not even have to worry about it. Whereas with my manual one, I notice I tend to get like shoulder pain when I use it, but that's probably just a me thing. Like, I know it works just as well, but it's nice to not have to manually do it because I'm lazy. So regardless of which yarn winder you use, I think it's really nice and it can make your yarn wall look a lot more organized as well. That way you don't have a bunch of loose strands hanging around and you don't end up with as much tangled yarn. So winding your yarn is of course a really awesome solution, but then there's more practical things that you can also do in your day-to-day use of your yarn. For example, using things like a yarn bowl can be helpful for a lot of people because it can prevent tangling and keep your yarn from getting dirty, especially if you have animals like me. You can get a lot of dog hair on your yarn, which is not ideal, especially if you are selling your finished projects. We don't want that because that's just not good, right? So if you have your yarn in a bowl, that can be a really great way to take good care of your yarn and make sure it's not getting dirty. But also using things like project bags. There are so many really cute project bags. That's something I really want to invest in sometime soon, but you can also always crochet your own, and I'll leave a few patterns in the description to give you some ideas. And project bags can really be great for any type of project, especially if you're working on your projects outside of the house, or if you're just working on something larger at home like a sweater or a blanket. It can be really great to keep everything you need inside of that bag, like the yarn, the hooks, all the notions that you're using, maybe even the printed pattern if you're a printed pattern person. I personally am not. Another really awesome trick that I discovered recently from my mutual friend over on Instagram, Dee Dee's Plushies, is to use a little hair clip to keep the end of your chenille yarn in place, because if you have a bunch of chenille yarn on the wall like I do, you probably know firsthand the ends of the yarn can start to go everywhere and it can just turn into a total mess. Things get tangled, it doesn't look good, and personally I'm one of those people where I look at that and it just stresses me out. This would completely solve that. All you have to do is get some cheap little hair clips and you can just clip the end of the yarn in place and it is nice and ready for you the next time you want to use it. A lot of furniture that you can find at IKEA is super inexpensive, but is also designed to be great for storage. One of those pieces is my desk. I'm gonna go ahead and flip you around and show it to you, but I think it could be great to store yarn in as well. I seriously love this desk so much. I think it's amazing, especially if you're a student or something, and also love to crochet as much as I do, because you can put really anything into these cubes and you can use all sorts of different baskets and things to keep it organized. Like for me personally, I have a lot of books and safety eyes and then content creation materials over here. So I'm not using it for yarn right now, but it would be really great for that. If you look in my closet, you can see I still have a very long way to go in terms of getting all of my yarn and plushies organized, but I also did just move into this house about 2 months ago, so I'm giving myself a pass on that one. But if you like to crochet amigurumi as well, these can be a really great way to store your safety eyes. I just recently got these a few months ago and they've been a total game changer because I kept on losing the backs of my safety eyes, and now with this I rarely ever lose anything. And it's also really nice because sometimes I forget what size I'm using, and obviously that's not ideal when you're writing a pattern. So this way I know exactly what size is in here. Like for example, I have 20 millimeter here, and you can see I have this beautiful eye. This is by Lush Lux Loops, by the way, on Instagram. They have the most beautiful eyes, so definitely check them out if you're interested. But just look at that. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. Having an organized, color-coded, cohesive yarn storage solution is seriously such a game changer for all crocheters. It really can eliminate a lot of stress and make you much more productive in all of your crafting, which I think is something that we all want. I know for me personally, I don't want to waste a second of the day, so I can get as much crochet time in every day as I possibly can. And I hope that by sharing these tips, the same will be true for you and you are able to find some insight and value here. If you have your own personal storage solutions for your yarn, I would love to hear them in the comments, so definitely drop all of your feedback and ideas down there. And I'll make sure to check out all of your own personal storage solutions because I'm always looking for a new idea. And again, I am by no means an expert in this, and as you saw, I definitely am not the most organized person ever. So I'm sure in a vlog very soon we will be organizing the craft room and getting all the yarn situated the best that we can. So if you want to see that, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.